Welcome to today's deep dive. We are so incredibly thrilled to have you here with us today. I really want to jump right in, mostly because the topic we're exploring is just so massive.
Oh, absolutely massive.
Yeah, it's so fundamental to your everyday human experience that we really need to set the stage with a bit of a mind-bending thought experiment. So I want you, right now, wherever you're listening to this, to just imagine the entirety of human history, our entire existence as a species.
Right.
Imagine all of that compressed into the lifespan of a single 60-year-old person.
Okay, a 60-year-old.
Yeah.
Huh.
Picture this individual. For the first 50-plus years of their life, this person did absolutely nothing but chip away at stones, just huddling around campfires, trying not to freeze or get eaten by predators.
Just absolute baseline survival.
Exactly. Over 50 years of total grinding stagnation, pure survival mode. Then, suddenly, around their 59th birthday, they get this bright idea to start building houses. They plant crops, they settle down,
A huge shift.
and it gets faster. A few days ago, in this compressed timeline, they invent the printing press. And then, in just the last few hours of their 60th year, this person invents television, splits the atom, builds the internet, and starts exploring space.
It's a dizzying acceleration when you frame it like that.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this. That staggering acceleration, that sudden explosive leap from huddling in caves for half a century to literally walking on the moon in the 11th hour, what actually caused it?
That is the million-dollar question.
It is. And the mission of this deep dive is to explore the exact DNA of that acceleration. It all ties back to one central, fiercely debated, and honestly deeply misunderstood concept:
Right.
freedom.
Freedom.
What does it actually mean? How does it physically and psychologically separate us from every other animal on Earth? And why have brilliant minds argued for centuries over whether you and I actually even have it at all?
What's fascinating here is that to really answer those questions, we aren't just going to look at dry political treatises or, ancient legal documents.
Thank goodness for that.
Right. Instead, we are diving into a comprehensive philosophical and historical synthesis by Orhan Hanslialova. It's titled Özgürlük Düşüncesi, which translates to the concept of freedom.
It's an incredible text.
It really is, because it pulls together biology, anthropology, theology, and thousands of years of philosophy. It's trying to figure out if human beings are truly the masters of their own destiny. It essentially argues that the concept of freedom isn't just some lofty political ideal we invented in a courtroom.
Right.
It is fundamentally a biological reality. It's the actual mechanism of human evolution. To understand that explosive 60-year timeline you just described, we have to go all the way back to the beginning, millions of years before that metaphorical 60-year-old even existed. We have to look at the bones.
We really do. And to do that, we are traveling back roughly 20 million years, deep into the forests of Africa, to a hypothetical ancestor of ours that anthropologists call Proconsul africanus.
A very crucial starting point.
This is where the grand, messy story of human freedom actually begins. And it starts with a literal divergence in the row, or, well, a divergence in the trees, I should say.
In the trees, yes.
One lineage of this ancient primate ancestor looked at the trees they were living in and just decided to stay put. They remained apes, perfectly, beautifully adapted to their lush environment.
They were content?
Exactly. But the other lineage did something radical. They came down to the ground. They didn't just live in nature anymore. They cut the tree down and started using the wood. They started manipulating their surroundings.
And right there is the spark of human freedom.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Anthropologists have debated for a long time why our ancestors came down from the trees in the first place. And the consensus is totally counterintuitive. We tend to think of human evolution as this story of us getting stronger and smarter until we conquered the world.
Like an inevitable triumph.
Yeah, but it wasn't because we were stronger or faster than the apes. It was actually because we were incredibly dangerously weak.
It is the great paradox of human evolution. Human weakness is actually our ultimate superpower.
That sounds crazy, but the source really backs it up.
It does. Let's look at three major anthropological theories that explain this divergence, starting with the Dutch anatomist Louis Bolk and his retardation theory.
Retardation theory. Okay, what does he mean by that exactly?
Well, Bolk argued that humans are essentially primates whose biological development got drastically delayed. If you look at the animal kingdom, we are shockingly pathetic at birth. We are born entirely hairless, weak, and utterly helpless for years.
That is true.
Think about it. A foal or a calf can drop out of its mother and walk within hours. It can run from predators by the end of the day. A human infant takes a year just to manage standing on two totally unstable legs.
Right, it's a massive difference.
Bulk suggests this delayed development left us biologically deficient. Because we were too physically weak, too unspecialized, and too underdeveloped to naturally adapt to our environment like a normal animal, we were forced into a corner. We had to do the exact
This
opposite.
means
We couldn't adapt to the environment, so we had to adapt the environment to us.
that concept completely flips the script on how we view survival of the fittest. Like, if a monkey is cold in the winter, over generations, it grows thicker hair, it adapts physically. But
Exact.
because humans have this biological retardation, this extreme delayed development, we don't just magically sprout a thick coat of winter fur. So what do? We use our growing brains and our hands to figure out how to hunt another animal, skin it, and wear its fur.
We substituted biology with invention.
Yes. We couldn't adapt our bodies to the brutal cold, so we adapted the cold to our bodies by inventing the concept of clothing.
Precisely. And this ties directly into the second evolutionary theory, put forward by the Swiss zoologist Adolf Portman. Portman focuses heavily on the concept of premature birth.
Premature birth.
Yes, compared to our ape cousins, humans are born incredibly early. We spend our entire first year of life developing outside the womb in a state of sheer, screaming helplessness, almost as if we should still be incubating internally. This extreme, prolonged helplessness is a massive evolutionary liability. It requires immense, long-term, dedicated parental care just to keep the infant from dying. Portman argues that this biological necessity keeping this utterly helpless baby alive for years is what actually birthed the complex social institutions of marriage, pair bonding, and stable family units.
Because you couldn't do it alone.
Exactly. Furthermore, managing this required a massive evolutionary leap in brain growth. Our brains had to rapidly expand simply to manage the complex social cooperation and communication required to keep our offspring alive in a hostile world.
So our babies were so unbelievably useless that we literally had to invent society and grow bigger brains just to keep the species from going extinct.
That is the biological reality, yes.
I mean, that is just wild. And that leads perfectly into the third theory from the German philosopher Arnold Gehlen. This one really shifted my perspective. Gehlen calls the human being a deficient being.
A deficient being.
Yeah. When you look at the animal kingdom, animals have these beautifully specialized organs perfectly suited for their specific environments. The camel has a specialized body that can store water and handle the scorching desert. The polar bear has thick blubber and fur specialized for the Arctic ice.
They're perfectly engineered for their niche.
But humans, we have absolutely zero specialized organs. We aren't the fastest runners, we aren't the strongest fighters, we are terrible swimmers compared to aquatic life, and we are mediocre climbers.
We are generalists.
Right. Biologically speaking, we are mismatched for almost every extreme environment on planet Earth. But, Gehlen argues, we survive through this overarching concept of culture. We use our unspecialized generic hands and our massive brains to literally replace the natural world with an artificial, technological one.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of what freedom actually is, Gehlen's point is profound. Because an animal's organs are deeply specialized, that animal is completely and utterly bound to its environment.
The camel in the desert.
Yes. The camel is literally chained to the desert by its own biology. Put a camel in the Arctic and it dies immediately. But because human organs are famously unspecialized, we are biologically free from any single environment. We are not bound to the desert, the jungle, or the snow.
We can go anywhere.
We use what Gehlen calls the brain-hand dialectic to build shelters, create fire, weave clothes, and invent tools. We survive everywhere on Earth, and even in the vacuum of space, because we carry our own manufactured environment, our culture, with us wherever we go.
That is incredible.
Our biological deficiency, our lack of specialization, is the exact source of our environmental freedom.
The brain-hand dialectic. I love that phrasing. And speaking of the hand, there is a fascinating, completely pragmatic look at how physical labor shaped this entire evolutionary transition. We are talking about the anthropological perspectives of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels.
A very specific perspective on labor.
Now, obviously, we are just reporting on the historical and anthropological arguments here, impartially, regardless of whatever modern political baggage comes to mind when you hear those names. Their anthropological argument in this text is structurally vital to understanding our biology. They argue that labor literally created humanity.
It built the physical form.
Millions of years ago, when our ancestors started walking upright on two legs, it freed up the hands from the task of walking. But the hand isn't just a dumb tool that the brain barks orders at. The argument here is that the human hand is actually the product of labor.
The product of labor.
The physical, agonizing act of working, of repeatedly striking stones to make flint knives, of shaping wood over thousands of generations, that labor fundamentally evolved the anatomy of the hand, which in turn stimulated new neural pathways in the brain.
A feedback loop.
Exactly. But here's the catch. You cannot build complex tools, construct shelters, or hunt massive, dangerous game by yourself. Working together required intense, unprecedented cooperation. And you can't have intense cooperation without a new level of communication. This absolute necessity for cooperative labor is what birthed language.
And language is the ultimate accelerator of human freedom. To illustrate this, the text highlights a brilliant quote from the essayist Ralph Waldo Emerson. An educated dog cannot educate another dog.
An educated dog cannot educate another dog. I love that.
Think about what that actually means. You can spend months teaching a dog an incredibly complex trick, but that dog cannot sit down with the next generation of puppies and pass that trick down through abstract explanation.
Right, they can't draw a diagram in the dirt.
Exactly. When that educated dog dies, its knowledge dies with it. Each generation of animals essentially starts from scratch, bound entirely to their own immediate physical experiences.
They're trapped in the present tense.
But language allows human beings to externalize knowledge. Because we can speak and eventually write, we can pass down 20 million years of accumulated, agonizing trial and error experience.
Yes.
As a listener, you are freed from the physical, crushing burden of having to discover how to make fire, how to forge steel, or how to identify poisonous plants all by yourself. Language allows a single individual to inherit the wisdom of the entire species.
Which means every single time you read a book or listen to a deep dive like this or just ask someone for directions, you are standing on the shoulders of giants. You're utilizing a freedom that was paid for by millions of years of evolution.
It's a profound inheritance.
But there's another totally unique human trait mentioned here that drives our evolution, and it's surprisingly joyful. Play. Humans are arguably the most playful animals on the planet. And play isn't just kids goofing off in a sandbox. It is the fundamental way we integrate our senses and learn the power of abstraction.
Abstraction is key here.
Think about a toddler playing with a bright yellow flower. The child looks at it, grabs it, crushes it in their hand, maybe tries to eat it, and finally smells it.
Yeah.
Through that playful, chaotic experimentation, the child's brain learns that the flower's sweet scent is actually more important or pleasing than its bitter taste.
They categorize the sensory input.
Right. They begin to mentally separate the invisible scent from the physical object. This ability to isolate and prioritize different sensory inputs leads directly to abstract thought. Action drives the brain, and the brain drives action. It's this constant, lifelong feedback loop of playful action and mental abstraction that truly humanizes us.
It is a remarkable journey. We transformed from a helpless, utterly unspecialized primate clinging to the plains of Africa into a creature that uses language, abstract thought, and labor to completely manipulate the physical world.
We conquered the elements.
We did. But this biological freedom, this hard-won mastery over nature, eventually led to a new, much darker kind of bondage.
Here is where the story turns.
Yes. The focus shifts from our evolutionary origins to our historical social struggles. We move from human beings fighting nature just to survive to human beings violently fighting each other over the spoils of that survival.
Right. Once we stopped worrying about saber-toothed tigers, we started worrying about our neighbors. To really illustrate this shift, we need to travel to ancient Greece around 700 BC and listen to the words of the poet Hesiod.
Hesiod gives us a very clear window into this mindset.
Hesiod is writing during a time when society has already become deeply stratified. There are kings, there are peasants, there are the obscenely rich and the desperately poor. And Hesiod is writing what is essentially a bitter lament. He is deeply, painfully nostalgic for what he calls a golden age of humanity.
A mythical past.
In his poetry, he mourns the loss of a time of pure, unadulterated equality and absolute freedom. He imagines a past where nature provided abundantly for everyone without back-breaking labor, where there were no complex laws, no ruling classes, no corrupt courts, and most importantly, no concept of private property. In Hesiod's mind, everyone simply shared the bounty of the earth as equals.
What is essential to understand here is that the very concept of freedom wasn't even intellectually necessary until that natural equality was lost.
Wait, really? Let's dig into that.
In that hypothetical golden age, people didn't sit around debating the philosophy of freedom in town squares because they were simply living it. It was like oxygen. You don't notice it until you're choking.
Wow.
It is only when equality is shattered that freedom suddenly becomes an objective, a desperate concept to be fought and died for. We see this dramatic shift recorded in some of our oldest mythologies. Take the biblical story of Cain and Abel.
I know this one well.
If we strip away the theology for a moment and look at it strictly from a sociological perspective as the text does, this is humanity's first recorded narrative of violent conflict over resources. It is the story of the birth of inequality.
How so?
Cain represents the agricultural farmer, the one who claims a piece of land, fences it off, points at the dirt and says, "This property is exclusively mine." Abel, on the other hand, represents the older way of life, the nomadic shepherd relying on open, shared, borderless land to graze his flocks.
The clash of two eras.
The murder of Abel by Cain isn't just a story of sibling rivalry. It is deeply symbolic of the violent historical clash between the new concept of private ownership and the old world of communal living. It is the definitive death of Hesiod's golden age.
I've heard that story 100 times, but framing it as the violent invention of property rights is just incredible. It really grounds these ancient, almost mystical stories in the harsh, dirty realities of human social evolution.
It grounds them perfectly.
And speaking of ancient traditions, there is this fascinating ancient Hebrew myth in the text that classifies all people into 4 distinct types based purely on how they view property. It's honestly pretty funny, but also incredibly sharp, and it feels like it applies just as much today as it did thousands of years ago.
Yes, the 4 types.
Let's see if I have this right. The first type of person is the bourgeois, whose motto in life is, what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours. Very transactional, very strictly divided.
Very rigid boundaries.
The second type is the evil person, who says, what's mine is mine and what's yours is mine. Just straight up, unadulterated greed.
The conqueror mindset.
The third type is the religious or pious person, who says, what's mine is yours and what's yours is yours. Pure charity and self-sacrifice. And finally, the fourth type is the people, the general masses, whose motto is, what's mine is yours and what's yours is mine. True, reciprocal, communal equality.
It is a humorous breakdown, but it perfectly and elegantly illustrates the central tension that drives the rest of human history. The endless struggle over resources and the subsequent brutal division of society into the oppressors and the oppressed.
The dividing line.
Once society split into these 2 factions, those who had fenced off the property and those who were locked out, human history simply became a relentless, bloody chronicle of rebellions by the powerless against the powerful.
And the source material dives deep into these historical clashes.
It does. To truly grasp how deeply rooted this struggle for freedom is, we have to look at the historical record. Take ancient Rome, for instance. We have the incredible story of Catiline. Catiline was actually a Roman noble himself, a man of high birth. But he turned entirely against his own privileged class to fight for the impoverished masses. He clashed famously and publicly with the great orator Cicero.
Cicero is huge in political history.
Yeah. Very much so. And the ideological divide between them is one we still argue about today. Cicero vehemently argued that the state's absolute primary job, the very reason government exists, was protecting private property.
Protecting what's mine is mine.
Exactly. Catiline, however, fought for radical debt forgiveness and the sweeping redistribution of land back to the starving masses. Ultimately, the state machinery won. Catiline was defeated in battle and killed.
And you absolutely cannot talk about Roman rebellions without talking about Spartacus. We all know the name, but the reality of what he did is staggering.
It really was unprecedented.
Spartacus was a brilliant slave and a gladiator, treated as literal property by the Roman elite. But he managed to break out, and he didn't just run away. He built a massive, highly organized army of fellow slaves, the ultimate oppressed underclass.
An army of the forgotten.
For a brief, shining moment, it looked like this army might actually dismantle the entire Roman Republic. A superpower that was completely and utterly dependent on the brutal exploitation of slave labor to function. He terrified the elite because he proved their property could fight back.
The ultimate nightmare for the ruling class.
But exactly like Catiline, Spartacus was eventually cornered and utterly crushed by the organized, well-funded military might of the state. It always seems to end the same way.
The pattern repeats endlessly across the centuries. We can jump forward to Flanders, to the years 1323 to 1328.
What happened there?
Here we see a massive organized revolt where a leader named Jacob Pate rallied the working classes and the peasantry against the French-aligned nobility, who were absolutely crushing the commoners with exorbitant taxes.
A classic trigger for revolt.
Despite incredible initial successes and a fierce desire for basic economic freedom, it ended in absolute tragedy, with thousands of workers slaughtered on the battlefield by professional armies.
So bleak.
Then, perhaps one of the most poignant examples is the German Peasant War of 1525. This is a particularly striking moment in history because the peasants actually used the teachings of the newly translated Bible to demand basic, fundamental human rights.
They weren't just rioting, they had a philosophical text to back them up.
Exactly. They weren't asking to burn down the kingdom or become kings themselves. They drafted simple, heartbreaking demands. They asked for the right to gather dead firewood in the forests so they wouldn't freeze, and the right to fish in the streams so they wouldn't starve.
Just baseline survival rights.
Resources that had been communal for centuries until the nobility abruptly fenced them off. And what was the response from the powerful elite to these modest requests for survival?
I can guess.
The systematic slaughter of an estimated 130,000 peasants.
130,000 people dead. Over the right to pick up sticks in the woods, it is just staggering, and honestly, it's deeply depressing. As you read through these accounts, this looming heavy question just hangs over everything.
Why do they always lose?
Exactly. Why does the majority always lose? If the oppressed masses outnumber the elite oppressors by 100 to 1, why do the Catalines, the Spartacuses, and the peasant farmers always end up slaughtered on the battlefield?
Well, the analysis here doesn't shy away from this grim reality. It lays out 5 very specific, brutally pragmatic reasons for why the oppressed historically lose.
Let's go through them.
First, the minority elite possesses organized, concentrated power. They have the professional military, the city guards, the advanced weapons, and the logistics.
They have the machine.
Second, the elite completely control the major institutions. Historically, both the state and the church have structured their legal frameworks and their religious doctrines specifically to protect the property and the divine status of the elite.
So the laws are written against the majority from day one.
The third reason is the engineered knowledge gap. Throughout history, the elite had exclusive access to education, military strategy, and global information, while the oppressed were kept deliberately legally ignorant.
Which goes right back to what we said about language and passing down knowledge. You cannot organize a nationwide coordinated revolution if your people aren't even taught how to read the messages you send them.
Exactly. Fourth, the oppressed are almost always forced by circumstance to trade their long-term political goals for short-term biological survival.
The daily grind.
When your children are literally starving to death today, you cannot afford to sit around strategizing for a 10-year revolution. You have to submit to the brutal landlord today just to earn a crust of bread for tomorrow. The elite, sitting in castles with full bellies, can easily afford to play the long game.
That is just a devastating reality check. And what's the fifth reason?
The fifth reason, which is perhaps the most insidious and difficult to overcome, is psychological conditioning. After centuries of subjugation, of being told they are lesser, the oppressed become deeply accustomed to settling for less. They internalize their lower status.
They believe the lie.
It becomes a monumental task to maintain the psychological momentum and the audacious hope required for a total revolution when your entire worldview has been shaped by defeat.
When you lay it out like that, it's a miracle anyone ever rebelled at all. So if physical rebellion almost always ends in crushing, violent defeat, how did average people cope? How did they intellectually understand their total lack of freedom without just giving up entirely?
A pivot to the internal world.
Yes, this is where we transition from the blood-soaked battlefields of history to the quiet, complex realm of pure thought. We enter the ancient paradoxes of philosophy, looking at how early thinkers tried to make sense of fate, logic, and human choice.
And we start with Heraclitus.
We start with a guy known as Heraclitus the Dark Philosopher, living around 500 BC. He got that nickname because his ideas were so dense, so layered, that his contemporaries barely understood him. But he had this incredible realization centuries before modern physics caught up to him.
He saw the flux.
He realized that the universe is in a state of absolute, constant, unstoppable flux. His most famous saying is one you've probably heard. You cannot step into the same river twice.
Because by the second time you put your foot in, the water has moved on.
New water has replaced it, and you yourself have biologically and psychologically changed since the first step. Everything is always, constantly becoming something else.
And out of this observation of constant flux, Heraclitus develops his foundational concept of the logos.
The logos. Let's define that.
Logos is a tricky Greek word to translate. You mean word, reason, or discourse. But in Heraclitus's philosophy, it represents the universal underlying law of reason that unites all opposites. Think of it like the invisible code running the universe.
The matrix, essentially.
Heraclitus observed that you cannot have a concept without its direct defining opposite. Sickness is the exact thing that makes health feel sweet and valuable. Exhausting hunger is what makes feeling full desirable. The horror of war is what gives peace its precious value.
They depend on each other.
To Heraclitus, these aren't just random, chaotic occurrences. They are part of a deeply unified, flowing system where opposites desperately rely on each other simply to exist.
And what does this have to do with freedom?
Now, Heraclitus wasn't particularly interested in the political freedom of peasants or slave rebellions. To him, true freedom was entirely internal. Freedom was the profound wisdom to understand the logos.
Internal freedom.
It was the ability to accept that reality is this flowing, unified tension of opposites and to willingly align your mind with that cosmic truth rather than futilely fighting against it.
Accept the flow, find peace in the chaos. I get that. But it's vital to contrast Heraclitus's deep, reasoned philosophical acceptance with the much more common, widespread illusion of fatalism.
Fatalism is quite different.
Fatalism is the belief that some hidden, mysterious power, the gods, the stars, destiny, has pre-written your entire life story, and absolutely nothing you do can change the ending. What's so chilling is that fatalism wasn't just a naive superstition. It was a highly effective psychological tool, historically encouraged and weaponized by the powerful.
A tool of control.
If you are a king and you can convince the oppressed peasant that their crushing poverty and their child starvation are simply the will of the gods or their inescapable fate, then that peasant will never rebel.
They accept it as law.
They will just accept their miserable lot in life as a cosmic mandate. Fatalism was the ultimate invisible weapon for keeping the masses submissive without having to spend money on guards.
This raises an essential question, then, about the nature of human choice. If we aren't bound by a mystical, pre-written fate, do we actually have free will?
Good question.
To explore this, we turn to the foundational figures of Western thought, Socrates and his student Plato. Their answer is highly unconventional, even shocking by today's standards.
Why shocking?
They didn't really believe in free will in the way you and I commonly use the term today. The modern idea that you can just stand at a crossroads and randomly, freely choose between two options without any internal constraint.
Okay, so what did they believe?
Socrates famously and controversially argued that human behavior is entirely 100% dictated by our level of knowledge.
Yeah.
He believed that if you truly, genuinely know what is the good and right thing to do, your internal reason absolutely forces you to choose it.
Forces you.
You literally cannot know the good and actively choose the bad. Therefore, all bad choices, all evil acts are strictly and entirely the result of ignorance.
Okay, let me use an analogy to make sure I'm wrapping my head around this Socratic view, because it sounds crazy at first. Imagine a person with a terrible life-threatening infection in their arm. A wise person, someone who possesses the knowledge of modern medicine, will willingly, calmly lie down on a table and allow a surgeon to slice them open with a scalpel.
Right.
Why? Because their knowledge of medicine absolutely forces them to accept the short-term agony of surgery to achieve the long-term cure. Now imagine a completely ignorant person from 1,000 years ago who doesn't understand germ theory or surgery. They just see a person in a mask coming at them with a bloody knife and they run away in sheer terror.
And they die from the infection.
Exactly. According to Socrates, neither of these people really exercised random free will in a vacuum. Both were absolutely forced to act the way they did, based entirely on their level of knowledge. For Socrates, increasing your knowledge is the only possible way to increase your freedom, because superior knowledge forces you to make superior choices.
It's a strictly deterministic view of human psychology.
Mm.
You are bound by what you know. And this deterministic thread is picked up and expanded upon by the Stoics, specifically figures like Zeno and Chrysippus, who formulated their ideas a few centuries later.
What did the Stoics add to it?
The Stoics looked at the vast universe and concluded that absolutely everything, every falling leaf, every human action, is governed by a strict, unbreakable chain of cause and effect. Everything is predetermined by the rational laws of nature.
So if everything is predetermined, what on earth is freedom?
For the Stoics, freedom is purely a shift in mental attitude. It is the conscious, difficult choice to willingly align your personal desires with the inevitable, unstoppable will of nature.
I love the example Chrysippus gives here because it really highlights the Stoic mindset and kind of calls us out on our modern illusions of freedom.
It really does.
Chrysippus argued that what we constantly call our freedom is often just a mask for our ignorance of the future. Think about the weather. If you and I don't know whether it's going to rain tomorrow, we sit around feeling free to hope that it doesn't. We plan a picnic. We feel like our hope and our plans matter.
But the reality is different.
The physical reality, Chrysippus says, is that the atmospheric conditions, the air pressure, the moisture, it has all already been set in motion hours or days ago. It is already going to rain or it is already going to be sunny. Our feeling of freedom in that moment is just a byproduct of not knowing the script of the universe.
That is a brilliant way to phrase it.
True Stoic freedom would be waking up and saying, I entirely accept whatever the weather brings today, thereby making your internal will perfectly match external reality. You are never disappointed if you desire exactly what happens.
Exactly. It's about finding freedom within the constraints of reality. But here we must draw a crucial, incredibly important philosophical distinction that moves us out of the ancient world and pushes us toward the scientific revolution.
We have to define our terms carefully here.
We have to clearly separate the concept of fate from the concept of determinism. They sound similar, but they are fundamentally different. Fate is the mystical, unscientific belief that no matter what actions you take, the end result is magically fixed.
Like an oracle.
Right. If the oracle says it is your fate to die on Tuesday, you will die on Tuesday, whether you hide under your bed or charge into battle. Determinism, however, is the scientific law of cause and effect.
So causes change things.
It means that outcomes are indeed fixed, but they're fixed by the causes that precede them. Under determinism, if you are sick and you take a specific medicine, a cause, you will get better in effect. If you don't take the medicine, you might die.
Your actions matter.
Your human actions are the actual causes that change the outcome. While fate breeds apathy and passivity, determinism is actually the intellectual engine that birthed modern science, because it encourages us to relentlessly hunt down the causes so we can actively manipulate the effects.
That distinction between fate and determinism is so vital. But before science really took hold and cleared things up, humanity had to wade through the agonizing, intellectually terrifying complexities of the Middle Ages.
It was a very dark time intellectually for many.
And boy, does the history emphasize the sheer existential terror of this period. The medieval mindset was completely dominated by a massive, brain-breaking theological dilemma known as the Christian paradox.
Christian paradox.
Now, Christianity introduced to Europe the concept of an all-powerful, all-knowing creator God and the doctrine that humans were uniquely made in his image. A core, non-negotiable tenet of this theology is that humans will ultimately be judged for their sins, rewarded with eternal paradise in heaven, or punished with eternal agony in hell.
The stakes couldn't be higher.
But for a divine judgment to be fair, for humans to be held eternally responsible for their actions, they must have genuine, independent free will. You can't punish a wooden puppet for dancing the way you pull the strings, so humans must be free.
That is the logical requirement.
But here's the paradox that kept monks awake at night. How on earth can you and I have genuine, independent free will if God is completely omnipotent, controls absolutely everything in the universe, and already knows the future with perfect certainty before we are even born?
It is the ultimate logical trap, and medieval thinkers tortured themselves for centuries trying to escape it. To highlight the severity of this trap, we could look at Lactantius, an early Christian author, who adapted a famous formulation known as the riddle of evil.
This one goes way back.
It originally dates back to the Greek philosopher Epicurus. It goes like this. Look at the sheer volume of suffering, disease, and evil in the world. If God wants to stop this evil but cannot, then he is weak and therefore not omnipotent. If God has the power to stop the evil but chooses not to, then he's malicious and therefore not perfectly good. If he both can stop the evil and wants to stop it, then why does evil still exist?
That riddle is just brutal.
This riddle perfectly encapsulates the immense, almost insurmountable difficulty of reconciling an all-powerful, perfect, all-knowing being with a flawed, chaotic universe full of seemingly free, sinning humans. How do you maintain God's absolute, majestic sovereignty without reducing human freedom to a cruel, cosmic illusion?
It's a puzzle that literally drives people mad. And fast-forwarding a bit to the 1600s, this exact theological tension is what René Descartes runs headfirst into during the rationalist awakening.
Descartes had a monumental task.
Descartes looks at all this confusing, contradictory medieval thought centuries of arguments going in circles and decides to just burn the whole thing down. His approach is called methodological doubt. To find an absolute, undeniable bedrock of truth, he decides to systematically doubt literally everything he's ever been taught.
Total intellectual demolition.
He doubts his senses, he doubts his education, he even doubts the existence of his own physical body and the world around him, suggesting maybe a demon is just tricking his mind.
It's a radical mental exercise. And there is a wonderful architectural analogy often used to explain Descartes' method.
I love this analogy.
Descartes realized that his entire intellectual house, his worldview, was built on a shaky, rotting foundation of unproven assumptions and old dogmas. So he decided to tear the entire house down to the bedrock and start over.
Makes sense.
But as anyone who has ever renovated a home knows, while you are tearing down your house, you still need a place to sleep at night. You need a temporary house to live in while you rebuild.
It's a temporary house.
For Descartes, this temporary intellectual house was his adherence to his basic belief in God and the conventional moral laws of his society. It kept him grounded and sane while he underwent this radical, terrifying intellectual demolition.
So he strips everything away, doubting everything, until he finally hits bedrock. The one single thing he absolutely cannot doubt is the fact that he's currently thinking about doubting. Hence the most famous phrase in philosophy, I think, therefore I am.
The foundational brick.
From that one tiny, solid brick, he starts rebuilding his worldview. And as he rebuilds, he finds that his internal psychological experience of human free will feels absolutely undeniable. When he makes a choice to lift his arm or write a word, he feels totally free.
We all feel it.
But, and here's where the ghost of the medieval paradox comes back to haunt him, when he tries to logically reconcile this undeniable internal feeling of freedom with his external belief in an infinite, all-determining creator God, he hits a brick wall.
He couldn't solve it.
He actually struggles terribly with this in his writings, writing letters back and forth trying to explain how we can be free while God controls everything. And eventually, he essentially just throws his hands up, admits he can't fully mathematically reconcile them, and tells his critics to leave him alone.
Descartes hit the absolute limit of his framework. He couldn't solve the puzzle. But the philosopher Baruch Spinoza, who came shortly after, took a much more radical, unflinching approach to the exact same problem.
Spinoza was fearless.
Spinoza's profound solution was to simply erase the boundary between God and the universe. Spinoza argued that God and nature are exactly the same thing, deus ex natura.
God or nature.
There is no external, human-like God with a white beard pulling strings from the clouds. The entire universe is a single, infinite, divine substance operating according to absolute, necessary, unbreakable mathematical laws.
So it's all one massive machine.
In Spinoza's view, everything that happens from a star exploding to you deciding what to eat for breakfast happens out of strict, unavoidable necessity. There is no traditional free will anywhere in the system.
Wait, hold on. If everything is just strict mathematical necessity, why do you and I walk around every single day feeling like we're making totally free choices?
Spinoza's answer to that is both brilliant and humbling. He says we only think we are free because we are highly conscious of our desires, but we are completely, deeply ignorant of the hidden causes that shape those desires.
Ignorant of the causes.
You feel free when you choose to eat an apple instead of a rock, but you are just blindly following the necessary biological causes of human hunger, evolution, and digestion. You feel free when you get angry and yell, but you are just reacting to a chain of psychological and physiological causes you don't fully perceive.
That is deeply humbling.
For Spinoza, true freedom isn't the magical ability to make random, uncaused choices. True freedom is the rigorous, rational understanding of this universal necessity. When you use your intellect to finally understand the deep causes behind your emotions and your actions, you stop being a passive slave to them. You align your mind with the rational, magnificent order of the universe.
So it's almost a modernized return to that ancient Stoic idea, but grounded in a much more rigorous, almost scientific rationalism.
Very much so.
And speaking of rationalism, pushed to its absolute logical limits, we have to talk about Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz and one of the most famous and frankly hilarious thought experiments in all of philosophy.
Buridan's ass.
Yes, Buridan's ass. It's a paradox designed to completely test and break the idea of free will. Imagine a perfectly rational donkey. This donkey is standing exactly halfway between two completely identical bales of hay. The donkey is equally hungry for both, and they are exactly the same distance away.
A perfect equilibrium.
Because the donkey is perfectly rational, it requires a sufficient reason to choose one over the other. But because the bales are perfectly identical, there is absolutely zero rational reason to pick the left bale over the right bale.
So what happens to the donkey?
According to the strict logic of the paradox, the donkey will just stand there frozen and literally starve to death because its will is paralyzed by the lack of a deciding cause. It's like when you open Netflix and spend an hour scrolling because you can't decide what to watch and you end up just going to sleep. Decision paralysis.
It is a fantastic logical trap, and the Netflix analogy is spot on. But Leibniz completely dismantles this paradox by bringing it out of the realm of pure math and back into the messy real world.
How does he break it?
Leibniz counters by stating that in the real physical universe, there is no such thing as two perfectly identical things. If you look closely enough at the two bales of hay, one will have slightly more moisture or be angled slightly differently toward the sun, or a breeze might carry the scent of the left bale a microsecond before the right bale.
The details break the tie.
Leibniz's core argument is his principle of sufficient reason. He asserts that absolutely nothing happens in the universe without a reason. Every single action, no matter how tiny or seemingly random, has a hidden cause that tipped the scale. The donkey will always eat, and you will eventually pick a movie, because the universe is endlessly microscopically complex, ensuring there is always a sufficient reason pushing us in one direction or another.
Which means those totally uncaused, perfectly free choices that we think we make simply don't exist in reality.
They don't.
This brings us beautifully into the Enlightenment clashes, where this massive debate finally moves out of the philosopher's quiet study, out of theology, and explodes directly into the loud, bloody streets and the halls of government. We're talking about the actual, tangible politics of freedom.
This is where theory meets reality.
Let's look at the era surrounding the 1789 French Revolution and focus on a thinker named Montesquieu. Now, Montesquieu defined political freedom very simply. He said freedom is simply doing what the laws permit. If the law says you can do it, you are a free citizen.
But the text offers a strong critique of that.
We have to push back on that, right? Because if the laws themselves are inherently unjust, if they are designed by wealthy elites behind closed doors to protect only their own wealth and power, then legal freedom isn't really freedom at all.
It's a facade.
It is just well-documented, neatly organized, officially stamped slavery. If a corrupt law permitted a noble to beat a peasant without consequence, the noble was free, but the peasant certainly wasn't.
That is a critical, devastating insight into the limits of legalism. Legal permission on a piece of paper does not equate to genuine human freedom in reality. During this era, thinkers began to break down four foundational political freedoms: freedom of law, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and freedom of association.
The pillars of a republic.
But the profound argument that emerges here is that none of these four political freedoms are actually possible or meaningful without a foundational bedrock basis of equality.
Equality is the prerequisite.
Think about it practically in your own life today. You cannot have true freedom of speech if you are terrified that your employer will fire you, take away your health care, and let your family starve if you publicly speak your mind. You cannot have freedom of association if the state heavily monitors and harasses certain grassroots groups, but ignores corporate lobbyists.
Wow, that hits close to home.
Without foundational economic and social equality, these grand political freedoms are just theoretical privileges, luxury items enjoyed only by those who can afford to exercise them without fear of ruin.
I think about that all the time with modern gig economy jobs. Are you truly a free, independent contractor if you have to work 80 hours a week just to make rent? And speaking of the harsh realities of economics, it's wild to think about Voltaire in this context.
Voltaire is full of surprises.
We usually picture Voltaire as this great, shining champion of the Enlightenment, of reason and free speech. But when you dig into his actual views on social structure, he held some surprisingly, almost shockingly brutal and elitist views. He had this deeply cynical take on equality.
Very cynical.
Voltaire actually argued that animals are the ones who are truly free. He famously said, "Dogs don't owe dogs anything. A dog doesn't have to pay rent to another dog just to sleep in a field."
The pure state of nature.
But humans are chained by our complex civilized needs. We need insulated houses, we need tailored clothes, we need specialized food. And Voltaire claimed that because of these massive needs, extreme social inequality isn't just a common tragedy. It is completely natural and absolutely necessary for civilization to exist.
Yes, there is a very cold, pragmatic, almost ruthless side to Voltaire's philosophy that is often overlooked. He bluntly argued that for a complex, advanced civilization to function, to have universities and art and science, you fundamentally must have a massive subjugated underclass.
He believed that was a requirement.
He believed the poor must toil in the mud, work the fields from dawn till dusk, and perform grueling manual labor strictly so that the wealthy elite can have the free leisure time to wear fine shoes, read books, and produce high culture and philosophy.
It's chilling.
He didn't romanticize poverty at all. He saw it as a brutal utility. He stated very coldly that if you are born onto bad, infertile land, your only realistic choices in life are to either become an obedient servant to the wealthy or to rebel, get beaten, and starve. For Voltaire, crushing inequality was simply the inescapable engine of human progress.
Wait, so Voltaire, the hero of the Enlightenment, actually thought it was philosophically necessary for millions of people to suffer in poverty just so a few rich guys could sit around and read his books. How did anyone accept that as a philosophy of freedom? It's enraging.
It provoked a massive response, notably from Rousseau.
Thankfully, we aren't the only ones who think so, because we have Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who is essentially Voltaire's philosophical arch-nemesis here. Rousseau looked at the exact same swath of human history, the exact same civilization, and came to the exact opposite conclusion.
The exact opposite.
Rousseau championed what is often called beautiful primitivism. He argued that natural inequality, the biological fact that one person might be born slightly taller or physically stronger than another, doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of a natural life.
Because the weak can just walk away.
In a pure state of nature, the strong guy can't really enslave the weak guy long term because the weak guy can just run away into the endless forest. What totally ruined humanity, according to Rousseau, was social inequality, the systems we invented.
And Rousseau pinpoints the exact tragic moment this ruin occurred. He makes one of the most famous and provocative claims in all of political philosophy.
The quote about the fence.
He wrote that the first person who ever enclosed a plot of ground, hammered a fence into the earth, declared, "This is mine," and actually found people naive and dumb enough to believe him, was the true founder of civil society, and simultaneously the author of all human misery, war, and systemic inequality.
The first fence.
For Rousseau, the invention of private property wasn't a mark of progress. It was the original sin. It was the great theft of the earth that destroyed our natural communal freedom and birthed the oppressive, violent systems that men like Voltaire thought were so necessary.
So we have this massive, irreconcilable clash. Voltaire says extreme inequality is the unavoidable price of a civilized world. Rousseau says the civilized world is just a corrupt, violent machine built on the original theft of the earth.
So where does this leave us?
We need a breakthrough.
Where does this leave you and me trying to understand our own freedom today after tracing centuries of biology, bloody history, and intense political philosophy? This brings us to the dialectical breakthrough. How do we synthesize all these maddening paradoxes?
We start by looking at logic itself. We start this final intellectual push by looking at the rigid constraints of mathematics and logic. We tend to think that a mathematical equation, like 2 times 2 equals 4, is an absolute, unbreakable constraint on our mind. It's a universal necessity we can't escape.
But the text reframes this beautifully.
There is a brilliant reframing offered here. Humans aren't enslaved by math. We use 2 times 2 equals 4 as a tool to build bridges, launch rockets, and understand the world. And when that specific tool stops being useful, like when we started exploring the bizarre, mind-bending realms of quantum physics or non-Euclidean geometry, where the old, rigid rules of math totally break down, we simply invent new math.
We are the masters of the logic, not the passive servants of it.
Yes.
That realization regarding our mastery over concepts sets the perfect stage for Immanuel Kant, who completely revolutionized Western philosophy. Kant initiated what is often called his Copernican revolution.
The Copernican revolution of the mind.
Before Kant, philosophers generally assumed that our human minds had to passively conform to the objects in the external world. We were just mirrors reflecting reality. Kant flipped this entirely upside down. He argued that the world we experience actually conformed to the internal structure of our minds.
We shape reality.
We actively filter and construct reality through built-in mental categories like time, space, and causality. To use a modern analogy, think of a video game engine. The game world doesn't exist as a fully rendered reality until the player's camera looks at it. The engine constructs the reality based on the player's perspective.
I love that video game analogy.
But Kant's most important contribution to the specific debate on freedom is his mind-bending concept of the antinomies. Kant proved, using flawless mathematical and logical precision, that you can build a perfect, unbreakable argument proving that human freedom absolutely exists as an uncaused first clause in the universe.
Okay.
But simultaneously, he proved you can build an equally perfect, unbreakable argument proving that freedom absolutely does not exist because every single action must have a prior determining cause.
He proved both sides perfectly. He built an inescapable logical trap.
Yes, and this paradox blew the doors off classical philosophy. It showed conclusively that the old way of thinking, trying to force freedom and necessity to fight each other to the death in an arena of pure logic, was a total dead end. We needed a radically new way to understand reality.
And Johann Gottlieb Fichte steps in to offer that new path forward. Fichte looked at Kant's paralyzing paradox and decided to shift the entire focus away from pure abstract thought and toward pure physical action.
Action is the key for Fichte.
Fichte's core philosophy is brilliantly encapsulated in the phrase, "I act, therefore I am." He completely turns Descartes' passive, I think, on its head. Fichte argued that freedom isn't some passive internal state of being. It isn't a theoretical permission slip you hold in your pocket while you sit on the couch. Freedom is a duty.
It is a relentless action.
You only exist as a truly free person in the exact fleeting moments when you are actively doing something, when you are imposing your will on the physical world. And there is a massive modern social implication to this.
Which is,
If human freedom equals action and labor, then a just society must guarantee meaningful work for everyone. Because forcing someone into chronic joblessness or useless busy work isn't just a tough economic hardship, it is actively, philosophically denying them their fundamental human right to exist through action.
which brings us, finally, to the grand philosophical payoff of this entire journey, delivered by Friedrich Wilhelm Joseph Schelling. Schelling is the thinker who finally solved the thousands of years old debate between freedom and necessity.
The final puzzle piece.
And he didn't do it by proving one side right and the other side wrong. He did it by proving that they aren't enemies at all. They are essential, inseparable partners. Schelling's ultimate synthesis is that freedom and necessity rely entirely, 100%, on each other to exist.
This is the massive aha moment. Let's really make sure we get this across because it changes how you view everything.
It's paradigm shifting.
To explain Schelling's breakthrough, the text uses a striking analogy. Imagine you want to exercise your ultimate freedom to walk next door and punch your neighbor in the face. A bizarre, aggressive choice. But let's say that's your free will in action.
A hypothetical punch.
If you actually want to achieve your desired outcome, a successfully punched neighbor, you have to be able to predict the physical world around you with absolute certainty. You have to predict that gravity, a necessary law, will hold your feet to the floor as you walk over there. You have to predict that the bones in your neighbor's face will be solid. You have to predict the necessary social laws of how the police will react afterward.
Exactly.
Your ability to exercise your free will to punch that person relies entirely, completely on the absolute predictability and necessity of the physical and social laws governing everything else.
Precisely. If the universe were truly random and totally free of necessity, if gravity suddenly stopped working, if the neighbor's face magically turned to water, if the police handed out ice cream cones instead of arresting people for assault, your free choice would yield totally chaotic, unintended, random results.
It would be meaningless.
You wouldn't be free to enact your will at all. You would be trapped in an unpredictable, terrifying nightmare where your choices mean nothing. Therefore, Schelling proves that strict deterministic laws, necessity, are the exact required conditions that make freedom possible in the first place. You can only be free to paint a beautiful masterpiece because the absolute chemical necessity of the paint dictates exactly how it will dry on the canvas.
Freedom requires the rules.
Freedom is not the magical absence of necessity. Freedom is the conscious mastery and application of necessity.
Freedom is the mastery of necessity. That is just profoundly brilliant. Okay, we have covered an unbelievable amount of ground today. Let's summarize this incredible 20 million year journey.
It's been a long road.
We started deep in the forests of Africa with a primate descending from a tree, not because it was a mighty conqueror, but because it was biologically weak and underdeveloped. We saw how that very weakness forced us to invent culture, labor, and language just to keep our helpless babies alive.
The biological foundation.
We witnessed the tragic loss of Hesiod's natural equality and the bloody, heartbreaking historical rebellions of the oppressed, from Spartacus to the German peasants fighting against elite hoarders of property. We waded through the agonizing philosophical debates over God, fate, and logic, feeling the existential terror of the Middle Ages.
We challenge the antinomies.
We watched Voltaire pragmatically defend inequality while Rousseau screamed that the first fence ruined the world. And finally, we arrived at Schelling's breathtaking realization that our precious daily freedom actually requires the strict, predictable, deterministic laws of nature to function.
It is a profound perspective shift. And to connect this directly back to you, the listener, remember that every single time you make a choice today, whether you are deciding what career path to take, debating whether to rent or buy a house, or simply planning your evening, you are relying on the legacy of thousands of years of human struggle.
Every daily choice.
You are utilizing your human knowledge to bend the strict necessities of the physical and social world to your own will. Your daily freedom, as simple as it feels, is the living, breathing product of this entire brutal evolutionary and philosophical history.
It really makes you look at a simple decision like what to have for lunch or checking your weather app in a whole new, majestic light. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over. Something that builds on everything we've discussed today, but pushes it right into our immediate future.
Let's hear it.
If Schelling is right, and our human freedom depends entirely on the predictable, deterministic behavior of the physical world and the people around us, what happens when we introduce advanced artificial intelligence into the mix? Oh, that is a huge question.
If a massive algorithm can perfectly predict human behavior mapping our personal necessities, our shopping habits, our voting patterns, and our choices down to the microsecond, does that ultimate technological predictability give us the ultimate tool to build perfectly free, frictionless lives? Or, if the machine knows exactly what you will do before you even know you want to do it, does it mean we are finally, mathematically, completely enslaved to the algorithm?
A chilling and absolutely vital question to ponder as we continue to shape our own manufactured environment. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yes, thank you so much for listening. Keep asking the hard questions, keep challenging your own assumptions, and stay insanely curious.